Okay, so this summer we're going to spend time wrestling with a question that we've kind of lost track of in our world. What does it mean to be human? And we have a lot of voices in this discussion, a lot of different viewpoints, Christian, non-Christian, and it's confusing. It's become confusing when you look at all the different ways that people analyze all of this. So we're going to ask the question. No, I'm not going to get into biology and all that stuff. My expertise has nothing to do with that. I stick to my area. We're going to look and see what the Bible has to say about this. Okay? And you think we'd start in Genesis 1. God says, let us make humans in our image, male and female. But we're not actually going to start there. We're going to start in a better place. Okay? So we're going to be wrestling with this concept of what does it mean to be human? And the best way to answer the question is if you could look, A.W. Tozer, one of my heroes, I've read every book I think he's written probably 3 or 4 times. He said, if you could look in God's eyes, what would you see? You would see them twinkling with delight. That actually, I read that first time probably 45 years ago and read it many times since then. And that has actually changed the way I think about when I have coffee. Some of you have sat down with me and had coffee. And if you look, you can see that I'm excited to spend time looking in your eyes. But I got that from that imagery of Tozer's, that if you look in God's eyes, you would see them twinkling with delight because He made you. He created you. And so we're going to spend this summer looking in God's eyes. We're going to do it through a Hebrew word. It's a word chesed. It means nothing to you other than it's really fun to say. Okay? It means a lot to me. Chesed. Just say it. Chesed. All right, great. It's a great word, okay? And it's a word that's a little challenging to translate because it's got so many nuances to it. But at the very heart and soul, at the very core of it, is this concept of loving kindness. In fact, a lot of your translations, that's how it's often translated as loving kindness. But it's far deeper than that. It has the idea that God made you, and God entered into a covenant, and He can't break His own covenant. He's not willing to. And it's His covenant that compels Him, that deep love that He has for His creation, that compels Him to always act toward us righteously. Always. Okay? And so that word is captured with this Hebrew word. So every time we see it, and we're going to see it several times, we're going to see all these nuances of what it means in the world and as far as our humanity goes, and what do we learn about us by looking at it. So picture it as a mirror. We're looking into God's face by looking in a mirror, and it's captured by this quality of His where He loves us so deeply, He's not going to violate His covenant. As Paul would say later on, though we are faithless, He remains faithful. That's the way, one of the many ways that Paul captures this imagery. Okay, so when I finished and took off for Europe, several weeks ago, I don't even know how long. Honestly, I had to get back into the habit. We're getting ready to start, and somebody said, did you want a microphone? Oh, yeah, I got to put one on. I've been out of the habit for 8 weeks, so here I am back into it. Somebody asked me, do you have a card? And it's like, yeah. I got to go get some. I usually carry them with me. So it's easy to get out of the habit and, forget all about you guys. Truth is, nobody reached out to me. I felt really abandoned. No, I'm just really grateful. So, when I finished, we stopped in Exodus. Okay, my last time was in Exodus 34, and I'm going to start there. And it's not the first time the Hebrew Scriptures, the Old Testament, uses this term, but it's the first time that it's very personal. Okay, so I want you to let me pick it up where we were back then. By the way, I'm very grateful for Ryan to talk about Galatians, and I think Joyce was here and joked about, I gave her 10 chapters to discuss on the tabernacle, and it's easy to do. It's easy. People ask me, how long do you need to teach Romans? If you give me 5 minutes, I'll teach you Romans. If you give me 5 years, I'll teach you Romans. It all depends on how much time I get. So let's go back and let's remember what has happened with Moses. Because this is a defining moment in world history, and it takes place in a private encounter between God and Moses. And it becomes a picture of all of us eventually. Okay? So remember where we are. Moses killed an Egyptian, and he gets booted out of Egypt, and he goes and lives in the desert. Remember that? That's a long time ago in the story. Then he had to come back and face Pharaoh, which he didn't want to do. He argued with God relentlessly. We saw that in Exodus, early parts of Exodus. And he kept arguing with God. He kept arguing with God. And I just love that passage. It gives me the freedom to argue with God. If Moses can do it, surely I could do it. Well, then from there, he has the 10 plagues. He takes them through that. And the anger of the Israelites, because their life is getting harder and harder, and they blame it on him. If he'd leave them alone, life wouldn't have been quite so hard in slavery. So then from there, he faces the Egyptian army. Remember, they could see the dust of the chariots as they're coming. And that's the moment when he says to God, I don't know what to do. I got this water in front of me, and the Egyptians behind me, and the Israelites are ready to kill me. And God said, well, why are you asking me? Cross the water. So he turns around and he says to the people, stand by and watch the power of God. Okay? And they cross over. Then he has the endless grumbling of the Israelites. They're relentless in their grumbling. We've covered all that. And then we come to the story of the golden calf in chapter 32. Moses is up on the mountain getting the 10 commandments, okay, the tablets of stone. He comes down. We talked about that at the 8 weeks ago, that section never actually says God is angry. He's testing Moses. Get out of my way so I can become angry. And Moses is the one that gets angry. In fact, he throws him down and shatters them. I've often wondered if you could find that spot or those broken pieces still there. Wouldn't that be great if you could find that on Mount Sinai? So, all up and down the mountain, he's gone up and down 9 times. He's 80 years old. Okay? A golden calf, really? You could just picture the frustration and the anger just building. And he's trying to figure out what in the world is he supposed to do. So he has this great request. Well, actually, it's a tragedy first, followed by a request. Exodus 33, verse 3. God says, go up to the land flowing with milk and honey, the promised land. Everything that he's been focused on is getting the group of people to that land. Okay? Everything. And God says, go up to the land flowing with milk and honey, but I will not go with you because you are stiff-necked people, and I might, okay? Remember, these are all interactions with Moses, and Moses' faith is being tested and growing. I might destroy you on the way. So can you picture at the end of this part of his life, as far as he's come in 80 years, just the tragedy, failure at every point, okay? A whole nation that doesn't really believe in him. They are turned against him many times. And he just built the golden calf. And you don't know what God's going to do. I mean, how's he going to respond to this? And what happens next sets the stage for the rest of history. The rest of the Bible, the rest of our story, and the rest of the story worldwide of what happens. So Moses is very unsure of what to do in this section. He talks to God about it, and he's not very comfortable. And that's the whole Exodus 33, is that whole section. He's talking about, these are your people. You got to lead them. If you're not going to go up, please don't ask us to go. We're not going. Okay, can you imagine that? In fact, he says in verse 19, no, in fact, I'm going to go before that. In verse 15, Moses says, if your presence does not go with us, please do not send us there. There's nothing worse in the world than for God to leave you alone and send you on your way. Here's what he says. How will anyone know? Okay, he's made a big dent in world history. All the nations know about this. In fact, when you get to Numbers and Deuteronomy at the end, all the nations 40 years later, they know the story. Word travels really fast. They all know what's happened. So he's center stage on the world stage. How will anyone know that you are pleased with me and pleased with your people unless you go with us? What else will distinguish me and your people from all the other people on the face of the earth? This is a question we should wrestle with regularly. I'm convinced, I teach this in the classroom with all these young pastors, every church ought to ask the question regularly, if we shut the church down today and close the doors, would our neighbors around us, would they observe? Would they be glad? Would they be sad? Would they even notice? Every church ought to ask that question. What are we known for? When I first considered this position 11 years ago, one of the things I did before any of you knew me, and I went and sat down with the leaders in the town, restaurant owners, police chiefs, said, tell me about Dillon Community Church. What is their reputation like? And I began to learn about this fellowship from the outside eyes, okay? So when I talk to these young pastors, they want to know, I said, if you want to know your relationship with the community, don't ask your elders. Go ask the people that live there that don't come here. Go ask them. Get used to asking that question regularly. What do you think? You know, I've asked that question over all 11 years when I talk to people that are leaders. Tell me about what you think about the church. Okay? And he's asking that question. What will distinguish us from all the other people? So what distinguishes us? Is it our politics? Is that it? Is it our fighting? Is that it? What is it? Is it our love? What distinguishes us from all the other people? My theology about the role of the church, I get asked this all the time from you and from in the classroom, is how do I think about our role in politics? Okay, I could tell you what I think about politics. I'm actually allowed legally. I just choose not to. No one knows except Nancy. I can tell you about policies, but I'm not going to tell you how I vote and all that because it's not important. God is willing to forgo secondary objectives in order to achieve the primary objective that people come to know him as Lord. Okay? When they asked Jesus and they gave him a coin and said, should we pay taxes to Caesar? Caesar was funding all the things that Jesus wouldn't have approved of. And they're really asking, they're really saying we shouldn't pay taxes. And Jesus says, give to Caesar what is Caesar's. In other words, that's above my pay grade. I'm not going to worry about it. And the primary objective is for us to represent Christ well in our community in a loving way. Now, the secondary objectives, things like what happens on the school board and public health and all that stuff. Okay, fine. That's all important. I'm not saying it's not important, but that's where you all are involved. Run for school board, run for town council, go figure out how to help in all the different agencies, go down to FERC. I'm sure they could use help. And so your job is all the secondary objectives, but as a church, our primary responsibility is to wrestle with this question right here. How will these people distinguish us? What is our distinguishing characteristic? And so he's in this private conversation with God because he's kind of caught up in the whole golden calf incident. What do you do now? I've done everything I can, and I can't figure it out. I don't know what to do. So God creates a defining moment when he says, Moses in response, well, let me tell you what the Lord said. He said, I will do everything that you asked. Because Moses said, please go up with us to the promised land. Please. Okay? And he says, I will do everything you asked. He says this twice, actually. Because I am pleased with you and I know you by name. You have found favor with me. That Hebrew word for favor is also translated grace. That's what grace means. You have found favor with God. So Moses says then, would you show me your glory? He's trying to make sense of who God is. He's gone through all of this, still hasn't figured it out, and still has a rebellious people. They just made the golden calf after everything they've seen. Would you show me your glory? And God surprises him in verse 19. And the Lord said, I will cause all my glory. Oh, that's not what it says, is it? I will cause all my what? Goodness. My goodness. I've said many times, if you want a clear picture of who God is, you could actually go to this one, but I usually say, go to the fruit of the Spirit. God gives out of who he is. Love, joy, peace, patience, kindness, gentleness. That's where you get the complete picture of God's character right there. So Moses asked to see his glory, and he says, I will show you my goodness. We're talking about a very, very intimate moment here. A very remarkable moment that changes the way God reveals himself for the rest of history. And then we begin to move into what does it mean for us as individuals and for us as a church. So Moses had to go chisel, I love that part. He had to chisel the 2 stone tablets himself since he broke the first set. God didn't do that for him. And he goes up on Mount Sinai for the last time. Okay, this is his last time up the mountain. So in chapter 34, verse 5, and I want you just to picture this. The Lord came down, Moses up on the mountain. Moses said, come alone, no one else. Every other time he brought other people with him, but not this time. Come alone. And in verse 5, it says, then the Lord came down in the cloud and stood there with him and proclaimed his own name, Yahweh, the Lord. Can you imagine Moses, after all this gone on? He's now in a cloud, and he's face to face with God. Okay? And he can see the twinkle. He can feel it. And so from then on, through all the 40 years, whenever he wanted to talk to God, he went to the tabernacle, and God met him face to face like a friend. Okay? And here he is, right here in the cloud, alone, face to face with the Lord. So what is this goodness? It comes in this next 2 verses, verses 6 and 7. So this is what the Lord says. As he passes in front of Moses, he shows him his goodness. Here's what he said. And listen to the order of these words, because the order is very important. And first thing he says is he says his own name. This is the only time it's said twice in the Bible. Yahweh, Yahweh, the Lord, the Lord. Remember what that name means. I am all that you need. So he's telling him twice, Moses, you can trust me. I am all that you need. I am all that you need. Okay? He's saying it twice. What a way to introduce it. So he says, I am all that you need. That's my name. I am all that you need. Where does he go next? I am compassionate. Compassionate. This word actually comes from a word that's connected to the womb, that parents feel for their children. Okay? It's used of both mothers and fathers. It's used in Jeremiah of fathers, that like a father cares for his children with that deep compassion. That's how God feels. So he said, I am compassionate. And then he goes from there and says, I am gracious. Okay, that's that word I said that you see it actually back in verse 33, verse 12, when he says, Moses says, Moses says, I know that you have found favor with me. Okay, that's the heart of grace, is that God finds favor with us. Why? Because we deserve it? Well, we're his creation, so at some level, we should be important to him. He made us. But there's something far deeper and behind all that. That's his promise. His promise to be loving and kind. Okay, so he calls gracious. Third thing he says is he is slow to anger. We got a lot of stories on that. Look what happened to Adam and Eve. Okay, he clothed them. And you go through, and you know when the Egyptian armies come down, he protected them. When they were grumbling about water, he gave them water. When they're grumbling about food, he gives them food. When they're clothing, he gives them clothes that doesn't wear out. And so we have a long history up to this point of God being very slow to anger. Slow to anger. Now here's the word that I want to focus on. Abounding in love. There's this word chesed. Abounding in this incredible love that prevents him from violating his own character. Okay? He's always going to show love. Always. He's going to move into your life, always, even if it's for punishment, even if it's to teach you something. It's because, as Hebrews says, he disciplines whom he loves, as any good father does. Abounding in this love. And then he says he's abounding in faithfulness. Okay, the combination of these two words, abounding in love and faithfulness, is the background behind John when he says Jesus is full of grace and truth. That's a New Testament equivalent. In other words, Jesus captures the same character qualities as the Father. He is full of grace and truth, and here it's expressed in he's full of love and faithfulness. And he repeats it, maintaining this kind of love to thousands Thousands. It's interesting to me that when you see this verse quoted, different translations, so everybody uses different words. He visits the sins of the fathers for 2 or 3 generations on the children, right? But they forget the first half of the sentence, okay, or the second half, depending on where you are. He visits the sins of the father. In other words, they're going to pay a price for your parents' sin, and your children are going to pay a price for your sin, don't they? Those of you that are older, you know that. But the next part is he shows this loving kindness, this chesed, for thousands of generations. What he's communicating is that his capacity for love far exceeds just a couple of generations. Thousands of generations he's going to show this. And he's communicating by virtue of this language that his love for you far exceeds the consequence of sin. Okay? And he says it right here. Maintaining this love to thousands and forgiving wickedness, rebellion, and sin. Okay, wickedness, rebellion, and sin really captures the totality of sin. All aspects of sin are captured right here. But the key word there is forgiveness, and this word has this idea of lifting up or carrying. Okay? You can't do it. You can't. So he's establishing right in the beginning that he does it. He's explaining to Moses why, during all of the grumblings and the golden calf and all that, he's explaining why he has acted the way he has. Because he is compassionate. That's his very first quality. He didn't talk about power. I'm God. He doesn't talk about that. He doesn't talk about greatness. Doesn't talk about significance. He talks about compassion. Moses, this explains why I've behaved on this journey the whole way. And he's having a private conversation. You can trust me. That's what his name means. I am all that you need me to be. He is compassionate. He is gracious. He shows favor. He is slow to anger. He abounds. It just overflows, this chesed, this loving kindness. He abounds in faithfulness. He's always going to act in accordance with his own character because he made a promise. And he can't violate his own promise. And then if that's not enough, he's forgiving. He carries the burden. But then look how he finishes here. Yet he does not leave the guilty unpunished. He does punish the children and their children for the sin of the parents to the 3rd and 4th generation. If we only stopped prior to this, you think you can get away with everything. He is letting you know that there is a line in the sand, and sometimes you need to have a good spanking. Sometimes you need to have a good kick in the pants. Okay? In other words, there are consequences to sin. There always will be. And so he's letting you know that. That's why Hebrews said he disciplines those he loves. And that word for discipline, it actually is not punishment. It's an athletic term. You want to play soccer. So you go to the coach, say, I want to play soccer. What does the coach say? Start running. That's not fun. Well, for some people, most people know. It's not fun. You start working out. He's disciplining you for a life of enjoyment with him because he cares for you. So here's a place, and we're going to get more into this as the summer goes on. Justice and love, they come together right here. Okay? Not the way you think of justice. Justice in your thinking typically has to do with vengeance. We want justice. This guy killed all these children. We want justice for him. Okay? Many times I have alluded to Rachel Den Hollander. If you've never read her testimony in court, it's worth doing. She's now an attorney dealing with these issues. She was the first gymnast that turned in Dr. Nasser. Okay? He ended up with, I think, 51 counts, back-to-back counts of life sentences for the sin that he did against these young girls. So they all talked, and they all had a chance to confront him, and they all talked with this vitriolic language. And what did he say? What did she say at the end? Something like this. This is my kind of summary of it. Dr. Nasser, I do not accept your apology because you don't really know what you're apologizing for. So here's my prayer. I pray that God crushes you in prison, not for vengeance, so that you'll come to know him and you'll come to know the truth about what you did to me. You see, that's true justice. So you can bring love and God's justice together, and here's the beginning of that right here. They're going to come together in a way that is designed to bring us forward, closer to Him. Why? Because He is all that we need. Okay? So what do we learn about us? Well, we have a very, very deep need for God to face us in a cloud. Just like Moses, don't we? We have a need to step into that presence and with respect and awe, but relish, not fear. That's why Moses, it's repeated all through the Bible, do not be afraid. Not with fear, but to step into that cloud, that relationship, look in those eyes and find that cleansing, find that deep compassion, that love, that forgiveness. Don't we? This is what distinguishes us from the world. That's why Jesus said, you've heard it said, an eye for an eye and a tooth for a tooth. I tell you, love your enemies. Turn the right cheek. Show them something that they're not expecting. We have a very deep need to experience God in a life-changing way. This is what it means to be human. Okay? As a human, you're either moving toward Christ's likeness or moving away. You can't stay static. It's not possible. The world history is full of examples. As you move toward the Lord, okay, as best you can, then you begin to experience that life-changing character. And you begin to distinguish yourself from the world because we're not into vitriol, we're not into vengeance. We're into true justice where we want to see God prevail, not in vengeance, but in incredible love. That's what we need. So we do need justice in our lives and communities, but we need justice that moves in a good way, a positive way. A justice that brings people closer to the Lord, maybe even forces them to confront their own sinfulness. But we do need it. And this is what we need to model to the world. Okay. You all, most of you, I suspect, have been reading the Summit Daily, so you know what's happening with the amphitheater. Whether we get it or not, the question got raised somewhere along the way. I'm not an attorney, and I'm not on the inside of the discussions. I don't know how it came about, but it got raised whether it's appropriate for a government institution to allow a Christian organization or any religious organization to use the amphitheater, especially if there's competition. Others might want to use it. That's a good question. That's a great question. Fairness is part of who we are. And so the town proposed a policy. Some of you were there. How many of you were there last Tuesday? Okay, so you read the policy. You can go online and read it. And the town, again, I don't know the motives and I'm not trying to guess them, but the town made the decision to craft a policy that, the easiest way to avoid the problem is just don't let any nonprofit in. Okay? Well, that's a way to solve it. That is a way to solve it. They could do that if they wanted to. So a bunch of us went, and I just stood up and said, on behalf of the staff and elders, it just saddens me when I read this. I mean, we're big folks. If you say you can't go, okay, we're going to do that. What we're doing right here. Okay, we got options. But I was thinking of all the other small groups. Like, what about weddings? What about the dance group that shows up? And I've been over there and watched them. What about the yoga group that shows up there? All these little nonprofits that use it. Well, again, I'm not a lawyer, but if I read the policy, it looks like everybody's excluded, except who they decide can come in. Okay? So a bunch of you showed up, and the town council voted against the policy once it kind of got out on the table. And so they said, let's come up with a better one. So the newspaper will make you think this is a question of church and state, and it's all about us. 2 months ago, I wasn't even thinking about this, and all of a sudden I'm on the front page. Fine. Okay, this was not a question about religion. This is a question about how do we fairly use the amphitheater? That's a great question we should be asking. One of the town council members said we're the product of our own success because it's so successful. A lot of people want to use it now. And well, how do we do that? And so the town staff asked, would you guys come up with a policy so we know how to answer those questions? So we're in the middle of that, the middle of those arguments right now. So we don't actually have permission to use it yet. Okay, they did pass a motion to go back to the way it was, but the town staff is still saying, what does that actually mean? So this coming Wednesday, we did have a group write a letter to them that are non-Christian, really encouraging something very different than what we propose, what we would like, I should say. We haven't proposed anything, what we'd like. And so if you're free this Wednesday, we'll send an email out when I get the details. This Wednesday, they're doing another town meeting to discuss it and vote more on it. So it would be good if you showed up. Show the town council and the staff how important this is to us as a church. Okay? Are we willing to share? Of course we're willing to share. You know, at different points, smaller churches have come and said, can we use it? We've said to them over the years, you know what? You don't have the resources or the technology to do it. Tell you what, why don't we host a service? You host a service and our tech people will help you. So that's what it means to be a church. Okay? Compassion, loving kindness, grace. And I'm so proud of you that came last Tuesday. A bunch of you stood up and talked, and there was no vitriol, no anger. Thank you for that. Because this is what distinguishes us from the world. Is it important to make our statement? Absolutely it is. That's a right that we have. Let's enjoy it. Okay? I'm not saying we hide in a corner. So what I'm asking is all of you come. Double it. Standing room only. Okay? Let's fill the place. Wednesday nights. We get a chance to show the world what distinguishes us from everybody else. Yeah, we care. And we don't mind exercising our rights, but we have compassion. Okay? So what does it mean to be human? It means to live this way with our community, but it also means to live this way in our lives with all of our friends and neighbors. That's what it means. Because you know what? They need it. It doesn't matter if they hate you. That's why Jesus said, love them. Jesus and Paul talked about this. Love your enemies. By loving them, you're pouring hot coals on their head because it even makes them angrier sometimes. Okay? But you're doing the right thing. What distinguishes us from the non-Christian world is we're to be people who are loving people, compassionate, slow to anger, abounding in loving kindness, gracious. You see the picture? We should be like that first in our marriages, in our families, with our friends and neighbors, and in our community as a church.